Ly Tieu Ca everyone, wishing you all good health and peace in life. The warm light of the wooden house on the hillside glowed softly like a heartbeat in the dark. Inside, Tikka gently stroked the forehead of the man who had given her shelter. Strength and quiet comforts CEO Hung, the man who had risked everything to escape the nightmare of Cambodia and return to her. His body still bore the scars of that journey, but his heart, it was hers. She could feel it with every shallow breath he took beside her, and yet, something heavy still pressed on her soul. Her child, her tiny baby boy, fighting for his life in a hospital far away. Then her phone rang. A sound sharp enough to cut through the silence. The voice on the other end belonged to a doctor, calm but serious. "Miss Tikka, your baby is stable now. He's out of immediate danger," he said. She exhaled deeply, a trembling sigh of relief. "But there's something else. We ran a preliminary DNA test. The baby shares a paternal bloodline with CEO Hung." Time stopped. Tikka froze, her breath hitching in her throat. Her eyes widened. Memories crashed over her like a storm, the night of thunder and rain, when Hung had stumbled into the wooden house, drunk and broken, and slept beside her, vulnerable and human. That fragile child, once thought to be the last mark of a tortured marriage, was actually the son of the man who had saved her life, time and time again. Her heart ached, not with sorrow now, but with an overwhelming mix of clarity and gratitude. But fate never lets joy arrive without a price. That night, as Tikka stood beside the incubator in the hospital, whispering silent prayers over her baby boy, her phone buzzed again. She answered and heard a voice she had tried so hard to forget. "Hello Tikka, Can," her ex-husband, slurred into the phone. "I heard the kid has a fever. Don't worry, he's mine. And listen, my mother and I need $1,000. If you don't pay, we'll fight for custody. That baby belongs to me." Her grip on the phone tightened. Her chest burned with rage and disbelief. She turned her back to the incubator, as if to shield her son from the poison pouring through the line. "You're heartless," she said, her voice shaking. "You have no right." Then came her ex-mother-in-law's high-pitched mocking voice. "Give us the money, or the child comes back to us. You think you can keep him? Think again." Tears streamed down Tikka's face as she looked at her son through the glass. His tiny chest rose and fell with effort, and she knew she would give everything to protect him. But this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her stood CEO Hung. Behind her stood the truth. Behind her stood love. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the trees, touching every corner of the wooden home. Tikka walked in quietly. Hung was still asleep, his body finally at rest. His little daughter, Annan, giggled and played by the window. Tikka knelt beside the bed and ran her fingers gently through Hung's hair. Then, she looked at Annan, and something inside her clicked. She let the tears fall, but in her eyes was no longer fear, only strength. This was more than a child. This was a miracle. This was Hung's son. This was a sign that fate had not abandoned her. She would no longer cower, no longer remain silent. Tikka knew what she had to do: speak up, fight back, and protect the fragile peace she had finally found. Because this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about her children, about justice, about a second chance at love. And the battle was just beginning. The morning sun gently warmed the wooden floor, casting golden beams across the room where Hung still slept. Tikka stood near the window, watching Annan chase butterflies in the garden. Her eyes drifted back to Hung, Her heartbeat trembled with anticipation and fear. She took a breath. Then slowly, she walked to the side of the bed and whispered softly, "Hung, wake up." He stirred, groaning faintly as he opened his eyes. When he saw her face stares still glistening, but gaze steady, he sat up instantly. "Tikka, what happened?" She sat beside him and held his hand. "Hung," she said, her voice soft but firm. The baby boy I've been visiting in the hospital. He's your son." Hung blinked. The words struck him like thunder. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Tikka nodded through her tears, her voice trembling as she continued. "They did a DNA test. I didn't expect it. I didn't plan it. I didn't even know until last night. But he's yours, Hung. That night. During the storm, when you were hurt and lost, you stayed here, and I didn't think that night would become a part of our future." Hung looked down at their intertwined hands. Slowly, his lips trembled. "Mine," he whispered. "He's really my son." Tikka nodded, yes. A moment of silence passed, thick, heavy, holy. Then Hung exhaled, and his eyes brimmed with emotion. "Tikka, do you know what this means to me?" His voice cracked. "After everything I've lost, after everything I went through, to know I have a son, your son, it's the greatest gift I could ever be given." Tikka burst into tears. She didn't expect him to say that. Not after all the fear, the guilt, the silence. Hung pulled her into his arms and held her close. For the first time in months, she felt safe. But reality wasn't done with them yet. She pulled back and looked him in the eye. "Hung, Ken knows. He and his mother are trying to blackmail me. They want $1,000. They're threatening to fight for custody. They think the child is Ken's. They don't know the truth yet." Hung's face darkened. "They dared to threaten you. To claim my child. After everything they've done." He stood up, slowly but with fire in his eyes. "No one will take our son. I promise you, Tikka. I'm going to protect both of you and in too. I won't let them win." Tikka watched him, her heart pounding, not with fear now, but with pride. "Then let's go to the hospital together," she said. "You need to meet your son." The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and quiet prayers. Tikka led Hung down the corridor, her fingers gripping his tightly. When they reached the NICU, the nurse gave a respectful nod and stepped aside. Hung walked toward the incubator. There, beneath the soft blue lights, lay a tiny boy, his son. So small, so vulnerable, yet so incredibly alive. Hung's knees nearly gave out. He pressed a hand against the glass, breath trembling. "Hello, my little warrior," he whispered. "I'm your father." Tikka placed her hand over his. "He looks like you," she said, smiling through tears. "I'll be there for him. Every day, I'll never leave him." Hung's voice was filled with fierce determination. But just as that moment of peace settled in, Tikka's phone buzzed again. "Ken?" She answered, putting it on speaker. "I see you're still ignoring me, Tikka," Ken sneered. "Fine. Court it is. And guess what? I have your recordings. Everything you ever said about your past, about me. You think you can hide behind that rich man forever?" Hung stepped forward, his voice like thunder. "This is CEO Hung speaking. You've just committed verbal blackmail on a recorded line. From this moment on, any contact with Tikka or the child will go through my lawyer. One more threat, Ken, and I'll make sure you never see daylight again." Silence on the other end. Then the call cut off. Tikka gasped, shocked by the sudden show of power and protection. She looked at Hung, who now stood like a fortress beside her. He turned to her gently and whispered, "Let them come. I'm ready." A lesson about courage, truth, and unconditional love. Life often presents us with moments that shake the foundation of everything we believe, in moments when the truth is painful. Love is tested, and the strength we didn't know we had becomes our only lifeline. The story of Tikka and CEO Hung is more than a dramatic tale of parenthood, betrayal, and redemption. It is a powerful reminder of the lessons we all must carry in our hearts. First and foremost, this story teaches us the value of truth. In a world filled with secrets, shame, and manipulation, the truth can be both terrifying and liberating. Tikka never expected to find out that her son was the child of Hung, the man who had protected her, not the cruel ex-husband who haunted her past. Yet, when the truth emerged, it became her shield, her strength, and her path toward justice. Sometimes, truth hurts, but in the end, it heals, redeems, and restores. Secondly, the journey of Tikka reveals the incredible courage of a mother's love. Faced with blackmail, poverty, and emotional scars, Tikka never gave up on her children. She fought silently, cried alone, and rose again every time life knocked her down. A mother's love is not loud or flashy, it is steady, patient, and unbreakable. Tikka's actions show us that even the most fragile person can carry the weight of an entire world when it's done out of love. Third, we learn that true strength comes not from status, but from compassion. Hung is a CEO, a powerful man, but his greatest power was not his money or influence, it was his willingness to protect, forgive, and love. When he found out he had a son, he didn't run. He embraced it with open arms, even when the past was messy and painful. True strength lies in how we love others, not in how we control them. Finally, this story is a reminder that we are not defined by our past, but by how we choose to rise from it. Tikka had every reason to be bitter, to give up, or to live in fear. But she chose to fight for her son, for her dignity, and for a future where love wins over manipulation. And Hung, despite his own pain, chose to stand by her side, proving that love is not about perfection, but about showing up when it matters most.